This is Richard Nicolai of freetheanimal.com. And once again, I'm with Curt Doolittle of the Proprietarian Institute. And we talked about some hard stuff 10 days or so ago. And I really enjoyed doing that. And so I thought I'd have another discussion about one of my interests, having been familiarizing myself with proprietarianism since perhaps 8-9 months, something like that. And one of the things that last time we talked about the epistemology and grammars and things of that nature.
Really hard stuff.
Start with the hard stuff, right? So I think maybe this will be a little bit more fun. And because, coming from my background in, paleo diet, evolutionary fitness and everything like that, one interest of that and the reason of a paleo-like or whole food diet works is because it's more evolutionarily proper to human beings. We're eating more of the foods that we evolved.
It's not so much that it's evolutionary proper, it's just not so evolutionarily improper.
That's true, yeah. So of course, people who are from that realm understand a lot about evolution and natural selection and whatnot. Yet we don't really use the word dysgenic or eugenic, right? And so that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to do a conversation on eugenic versus dysgenic or eugenia, dysgenia. But I guess the first thing one of the reasons that you don't see that word used very often is because of the literally Hitler aspect of it. So I thought we'd stop.
That and it's true, and it's it's true, and it is totally counter to the democratic message and social democracy. I mean, it undermines the post-war. Well, actually, it undermines the Marxist, which is what Marxism is for, is to undermine. So it undermines the what I call the Jewish pre-war narrative and the postmodern and Soviet post-war narrative. So I mean, it undermines those narratives, and everybody's really invested in democracy is a good thing. Everybody's invested in making life easier for everybody is a good thing, and those are taken to be ideals or absolutes when they're not. Anyway, so
okay, so I do want to get into the political and social ramifications as we go on, but how about we start with you giving us an idea of what eugenia is, dysgenia, from a proprietarian standpoint, as fundamental and basic as you can do it. We start there.
Well, I mean, what's eugenic in bacteria, and what's eugenic in humans, or what's for example, bears and cheetahs look like they're fairly dead end strategies. So these look like they weren't very good. They were adaptations, but look at where cheetahs are. It's a miracle there are any left. I mean, they're for humans, for bacteria. I mean, there's no. All that matters is numbers, because they have no direction except survival. But we as humans, we get to make a choice, and because we have choices, we can look back and say, well, given the set of available choices, some of them produce some ends, and some of them produce quite the opposite ends. And so when you look at humans, we say, well, what's given us this great benefit that we live under today, where we're, the reigning super predator? We've created the some people don't like this, and I'm not sure I do either, but the Anthropocene. We've created a literally a geological record of our existence by such reverage of transformation, and a biological one, because we're we're the locusts of not of just one particular set of plant, but the locusts of the planet, and we've we've just eliminated species after species. Mm-hmm. So if in the terms of humans, once you make the value judgment that it's better to be increasing in choices versus decreasing in choices, you say, well, why do we live better off than, why does some group of people live better off than others? And we can identify why that is, and and that criteria is the demarcation between dysgenic and eugenic. Mm-hmm. In the sense of human populations, eugenics tends to be put in positive freedom, positive eugenic, positive economics, and positive.
Right. Now, so would you say that if you're talking everything from bacteria through the animal kingdom, up to humans, but not including humans, it's pretty much they don't have any choice, and it's by and large eugenic, because they're striving for survival and reproduction, and
they don't have a choice in eugenic or not, right? They don't. Adaptation isn't the works. We have a choice,
right? And so eugenic applies to them and to humans, eugenic and dysgenic, because we can choose either one. We can choose whether, and that's, it's kind of the way probably we evolved for a very long time, until politics, or civilization, civilization, because you had to, you did your best at survival, and the ones who were best at it, produced offspring, and they gradually got better and better and better. And then at a point, someone comes along and says, oh, well, hey, we need to have social structures to help all these people survive who otherwise can't survive. I mean, that's kind of where eugenia or dysgenia begins, isn't it?
Well, I would view it as competition between groups.
Uh-huh.
So, we're all, and so some groups, the gypsies clearly chose a dysgenic route, as a cultural strategy, and they worked at preserving it. Some groups have no choice, because if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, on the disease gradient alone,
right,
you are forced into having to defeat to get a child to maturity
yes.
as fast as you can, so that your child mortality isn't overcome. So in that area, or in any of the Sunbelt areas, you're trying to get to adulthood as fast as possible, so you get thicker skin and heavier features and lower metabolisms. And whereas if you're living along the ice sheets, you can take all the time you want to mature, and it turns out to be more important, because you have to live in small groups that are internal conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Internal conflict very heavily, because you have to spend long periods in difficult environments together, cold environments, cooperative environments together, we easily die. So it's a very different set of adaptive strategies.
Yeah, that's interesting, because so then what I'm getting here is that the fact that there is tons of different there's tons of different groups in different environments, yet we're all humans. And of course there was the migrations way long back. And so what that has done is even if you could say, well, they do what they do within their own group, and so you could classify it as eugenic, but there's a dysgenic element.
It's a relative decision.
It's relative. In other words, it's not like people in one group in one place were trying to do their worst. They were doing their best for what they had, and cultures and social structures evolved from all of that.
Well adapted.
It doesn't compete with other groups, right? That had things better in terms of environment and development. Does that sound right?
Well, I mean, this is it's close enough, right? The problem is, once you get into evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology, you have to have, you can't just reason it through, because then you can come up with any excuse like, Bose, Marx, and Freud did. So it turns out to be all false. You have to have some underlying mechanic that you can identify in the biology of the system that says this behavior or this adaptation occurred, or this in humans, it's more that this distribution of traits has this particular bias. Once you can identify that, you can say, well, okay, I understand how this came to be. Otherwise, you get into the idea of thinking that we are, sort of thinking about what we're doing rather than just responding to it, and that's just nonsense. So, in the sense that we adapted, I mean, to get to the nut of it, I mean, you can there are first I'll make the unpleasant claim that the races are species, the same way that the bonobos and chimps are species. That our races are species and speciated, and we know that by the fact that we can reproduce, we tend to favor our own kin in kin selection. So we demonstrate that, even though we've removed many of the benefits to kin selection, but through market participation, and therefore lowered the cost of outgroup choice. That said, I mean, once you have the fact that we've regionally speciated, you can look at why we regionally speciated, and it's really based on two very obvious axes that we can identify in fairly easy tests of populations. Three axes. One is neoteny, which is the prolongation of maturation as long as possible. And the East Asians look like they have done even more of it than white people have, but it's really East Asians, whites, and then everybody else is still quite far behind. The second is we call it morphology, and that's we tend to use this as visible physical differences, but I also apply it to the brain structure. So we have an ability to move male and female biases and traits. Once you understand the female reproductive strategy and cognitive structure, and the male reproductive strategy and cognitive structure, and those two reward systems, you can see that after neoteny, we have some bias, male or female, and some distribution. And I'm not going to cover who is that, because then I get onto all sorts of criticisms for it. And then the third you get is whether you've culled the bottom or not. In other words, have you engaged in self-domestication or not? And really, you can pretty much, I mean, with a very few, testosterone level measurements, cognitive structure measurements that we can do. Finally, good research coming out on this, especially in the past 2 years. You can see the difference in our brain structures, how we process information, how we test that through, even if it persists across, if you move somebody from one group to another, they still maintain certain cognitive differences. And most importantly, I mean, while there's a difference, male and female differences and degrees of neoteny, if you look at the upper classes, I mean, the truth is we're not very dissimilar, but because of the sizes of our underclass, the ability to perform, to construct a Pareto distribution, in other words, to construct a market society,
Right.
which is necessary for
80,
this.
20, 80.
It's just very, some peoples are screwed. And so when you look at the distribution of these peoples, let's take into account that, the training people and giving people a scientific education does make a very big difference. But everybody moves relatively. So if you take a population and you teach them, it's not like the dumb people get as smart as the smart people. It's the smart people and dumb people all get better together. Mm-hmm. And so, but upper classes across the world, I mean, we are cognitively different a little bit, but we can get along pretty easily. The problem is that if you have a vast underclass and not enough of a middle and upper class, you just can't organize the norms, traditions, values, institutions, habits and behaviors that are necessary to compete in a world where we're not only defeating the evolutionary Red Queen against nature, not only against other groups, but within our own classes. So the big problem is these three axes. How much self-domestication have you achieved through neoteny? How much of that how is that self-domestication being distributed in cognitive structure, whether, say, Western masculine or Semitic feminine? And do you have, how big is your underclass? If you start saying, well, you're going to have, you've got a very shallow pyramid, let's pick somebody who isn't going to be offended, like the Indians, all right? You got a very shallow pyramid, or because you're
talking about Indians,
Hindus.
Yeah.
Hindus.
Okay.
And if you have, they have the problem of it's a 30-70 distribution somehow between the Eastern Indo-Europeans and the Dravidians. There's some sort of spectrum there, and so they've got the problem of vast underclasses that the Chinese don't have. The white people don't have. The Chinese and the white people did a very good job. The underclass doesn't think so. That's where this oppression narrative comes from. But the Chinese and the Europeans did a great job of calling their underclasses. The Semitic people did the opposite, and the Africans didn't have the choice. If you look at the Hindu expansion, depending on whose side you want to favor in this, the Indo-Europeans that went in India, they're gone, and so there weren't enough of them to change that population. South America has similar problems. The Arabs have, between their own practices, their own intermarriage practices, and their marriage with reproductive with the slaves, the huge slave trade, they've destroyed the genetics of every civilization in the Fertile Crescent, North Africa. So, I mean, when I say something's dysgenic, I mean, what is your progress on this, basically in the class and developing the class structure?
So, okay, let's now relate it to you mentioned earlier that the male and female reproductive strategies. You care to go a little bit micro on that?
How is this? What's the pop science, pseudoscience really? RK, okay. Which is the pack versus the herd.
Right.
Now,
rabbits and wolves.
Rabbits and wolves. Well, I mean, humans are kind of not unlike many other groups. It's that we have pack animals, males, and herd animals, females. And the reason for that's pretty obvious if you look at our ape cousins, our other great apes, is that they herd females, right? I mean, females are captives of sets of brothers and cousins, and they govern by violence. And so we evolved from this same background. Females are of necessity retain greater, um, have higher reproductive costs. Therefore, they have to be somewhat careful about how they invest in them. Once they've made the investment, they have to hold on to it pretty much for life. Um, they tend to put greater investment in the children than the mate. All the things you'd expect. And they have developed, because they're weaker, a different combat strategy than males, where we use direct violence. Women use undermining, reputation destruction, in
Mm-hmm.
order to force others to kill you or to outcast you or whatever. And so the difference is males fight till we, whether it's us or other males in the grade 8 family, we fight for position. And you really only kill somebody if, because it weakens your numbers under certain circumstances, but unless they're from a competing group, you kill them as often as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then what females do, but once you know your position in the tribe and you hold to that position, it tends to be relatively peaceful, unless your leader's an asshole. And females, on the other hand, they do the henpecking thing, where if they find an enemy, they never give up.
Mm-hmm.
They want the person destroyed. It's a very hateful way women operate, versus males is very managerial
Mm-hmm.
way in which we sort of operate. And so these reproductive and argumentative strategies are really, well, not something that needs to be documented more. We just don't like talking about it because
Mm-hmm.
it's counter narrative.
So, so, so is that then, if we talk about uh, eugenic on that kind of micro individual female selective strategy thing, is it fair to say that it's ironically that that the females are the ones who tend to ensure a more eugenic reproduction, because
They don't.
they don't?
No.
But I thought they're the ones who are,
Well, because
selecting the big hunk guy.
yeah, but that turns out not to be good.
Okay.
You don't want the betas, which the problem is, I mean, look at the Jewish method, right? The Ashkenazi method. I mean, they've been selecting for effeminate, verbally skilled. I mean, they basically selecting for female traits in men
Uh-huh.
for, at least 1,500 years. I don't know if it's 2,500, but I mean, at least 1,500 years. They've been selecting for it and specializing it to the point where, I mean, it shows up in their disease gradient. I mean, the disease profiles. It shows up in their rates of homosexuality versus heterosexuality. It shows up in their white matter, the structure of their white matter. So I mean, it shows up in their testosterone.
But they are above, they are high IQ. I mean, on the whole spectrum.
Well, I mean, you take a man and you give him women's power of recall and verbal ability. You basically weaponize the female mind without having the burden of its solipsism.
Okay.
So I mean, genetically, it's highly adaptive. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, if you look at the reproductive selection of my ancestors, English. I mean, if you look at Jews as a part of the Semitic people, and you look at Tories as as the same in the European people, you get the same result. The only difference between those two demographics is that we're more narrowly distributed, and the Jews are a little more widely. So instead of 11 points of SD, there's 13 points of SD in Jewish distributions. And so you get way more outliers, and you get like an extra 2 and an extra 1, an extra 2 140s and an extra 1 160s for every one of Anglos. So they're even more widely distributed. So I mean, verbal ability is really where it's at. I mean, the reasons for that are quite interesting. I mean, I notice it when like I'm talking, and I see after I'm talking to you right now, which I'm not really gating my language. I'm not self-monitoring myself when I'm talking to you right now. But if I listen to myself versus, let's say, David Gordon at the Mises Institute, another guy who's even asked way more autistic than I am, I see that speech pattern. But I also see underneath it the differences in the Jewish cognitive structure and mine, whereas his structure is more literal. I mean, I love that man. You wouldn't believe the kind of stuff he remembers. I mean, it's not quite photographic or autobiographical, but his ability to remember the written prose is unbelievable. My ability to see patterns across things, I mean, it's definitely abnormal, right? I mean, but those are the differences in that cognitive structure. But you also see it if you look at the top extemporaneous speakers that do in the alt-right. I mean, they tend to be, there's an awful lot of Jewish guys in there. But if you look at the people who write well, they're all white. And there's a reason for those differences, just as there's a reason why, women don't write novels of the same, this is offensive, but they don't write novels of the same caliber men do. It's a difference. So extemporaneous
kind of like the best chefs are
it's always the same. So I always think the Ashkenazi have just such an advantage in the current era when extemporaneous speech in real time is very valuable, but it's kind of worked contrary to the Western method because we don't do that. We have more considered speech. And we are always testing for true where they're testing for reasonable. Once you realize these things are happening, this is why the grammars are so important, we covered last time, is once you realize what's going on here, you see it. And you almost give up on what people are saying because you realize it's all positioning.
Okay, so now we basically covered the female by you telling me that it doesn't turn out to be a great eugenics when the female calls the shots. Now, how about the male? Because you would think that
it's
the
a
mall would be
no.
dysgenic.
It's a market. It's pairing off.
Okay,
right? That's what produces it. Now the question is: is that once you always have to fight regression to mean? So there's always the tendency to fall. So people think there's a steady state. There isn't. You can never stop. We're on this treadmill, and the only thing you can do is, if you can stop regression, the only way to stop regression to the mean is produce a different mean. And that requires some effort, and you have to do it without producing the negative externalities that come with it. So, in essence, it's really not very complicated. For most of our, we had to fight the glaciers.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's like we don't have anymore the kind of environment or life that automatically culls out those who are not fit. Right.
So now look at the IQ is just a good relative measure of something that it's very hard to measure, right? But and so I'm not one of these people. I'm like sort of an IQ spectrum person. What really matters is the distribution and what relative quintile you're sort of in. But I mean, fundamentally, there's a hard problem, and that is at about 105, 106, you start to develop agency, but you actually don't have much below there.
Right.
So much that it's 105, 106, you start being able to repair a machine. Right? And so, we got more than half the population is iffy. We got 10% below the evil 80s, and I think that in modernity, in the coming decade, it's going to be the evil 90s.
That reminds me though of an old. It's actually not a joke. I think it actually happened. That I believe it was Lyndon Johnson who
send the idiots to Vietnam.
Somebody told. So he expressed shock or surprised when he was told that half of the population is of below average intelligence. Right. So,
well, a person with, it's really down to 93, right? Somewhere in there, right?
Yeah.
So, what's 93 today, right? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's 93 5 years ago, but 93 today. And so somewhere around there, it becomes a real problem. By the time you get down to 83, I mean, those people, you can't literally teach them anything. And so when you're down in the 70s, I mean, you got the people that they can speak, but the speech gives you the illusion of cognition. It really isn't there. And so, you really got to get to where can I learn by reading? In other words, can I learn by reading a set of instructions and abstracting it? If you can't do that, that's the point of demarcation. So I prefer to move it to an action rather than abstract test. That's a real world test. If you can read directions and do something, you're probably there. 100-person IQ can get a gut degree in psychology or something, but you want to get up into where you're calculating. You're doing, anything of any degree of sophistication, which involves some sort of deductive logic. I mean, these people can't do it. And so, you're really kind of screwed. So the problem is, how do you keep, as we keep creating a better world to live in, you have to keep this curve moving up.
Right.
And because what's happening is other people are filling the bottom and decreasing all the market value down there. So Westerners had this wonderful period of 500 years where we were so advanced, both in our distribution and in our technology and our institutions over other people, that we could, get away with murder. But I mean, literally in some cases. But,
well, and I don't know what your view on when we talked last week. One of the things we were talking about when we closed was the idea of empire versus small homogeneous city-states.
Civilizations and states are great things. Empires are bad.
Right. And so where does colonialism fit into that? Because now, of course, a lot of that, the colonialism was not, it wasn't to bring Jesus to the people, so to speak. It was to, extract resources or trade routes or,
that's not, remember, there's no one incentive there. There was a great opportunity, and there were so many different opinions about it that you can't just reduce it down to, well, if it were me, I would have done this. Well, the Catholic Church was actually the scholastics, and then what followed from those people had fairly moral ambitions, and they were pretty pissed off at the Spanish, which is where we got a lot of this stuff from. They, and I'm not, when you went into if you were a British citizen in the 1700s, you're a post-Enlightenment person, and you went into some of these places in the world, it was not hard to make the assumption that these were not really human.
Yeah.
Right? And
because of the vast disparity in culture.
It's just such a big disparity. Yeah. And, it's only once you have mass education that you pay the high cost of training everybody up to some sort of level. And then you realize, well, I'm still stuck with some, but I can make most of these people somewhat civilized under most circumstances with enough training. I mean, man is just another domesticated animal. We domesticated ourselves, and we domesticated plants and animals, and then we set off on colonialism and tried to domesticate others. And honestly, if we hadn't left the job unfinished because of our world wars over it, it would have probably been a better world than the one we're going to end up with.
Yeah, because there's so many of them where you look and it's like, okay, well, maybe they raised them up a bit, they gave them some sort of social structure, whatever, but then when they get their independence and you leave, it doesn't, to me anyway, it's just that you look at it and it's like, well, a lot of good that did.
Well, I mean, it didn't do much good because for example, Indians are really pissed off about what the British Empire did to them. Although, I'm like, well, you got raped by everybody, every third guy who came by with a pair of horses, guys. So something wrong with your ability to defend yourselves, and that is. So I'm not going to sit here and let the Anglos absorb all the blame for what when you guys have been literally conquered by every train that runs by because you can't defend yourselves because of your social order. But they're clearly better off for English rule of law, but they're worse off for French and Soviet socialism. The Chinese are, they have a long history in the long traditions, and they don't have an IQ distribution problem. So, and they have the Red Army to impose what the state wants, and a cult of history, a cult of history, and a chip on their shoulder that we can't imagine. That they want to correct. So, they can move their population very, very quickly. But I mean, look at South America is screwed. I mean, the Arab world, I mean, good. That's, if it wasn't for oil, it'd just be an extension of Africa.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean,
it's like,
these are not these are class problems. I mean, I have friends for very odd reasons, I developed a bunch of followers in West Africa. And I know the reason they follow me is because it's like, there's nothing wrong with your people. The reason Nigerians are better and whatever is you almost made it to the first empire when the British came and destroyed it. And so, you almost got there. Well, now your problem is purely demographic. I mean, you got to stop underclass reproduction, but there's nothing wrong with you people. I have a couple followers, and I won't mention the country, and they're PhD students, and they ask me questions all the time, and I'm like, well, your problem is pretty obvious. I mean, you're carrying too many underclass, and there's not enough guys like you. I mean, it's a really simple problem. That's not an offensive question to the world. It certainly is well understood by South Americans.
And then with the Arab world, I mean, like you said, were it not for oil, it would be probably like an extension of Africa.
Well, they're more hostile. Africans are actually fairly. They have a high. It doesn't show up in big numbers, but the problem is, it looks like it is. It's enough, which is they have a lower agreeableness, but they're more pro-social. In other words, more extroverted. And so, the problem with the Semitic peoples is, once they started conquering everybody there, is that it looks like the people, the Semitic people and the middle West Asians are, in other words, the Turkics that came down from Mongolia, but mostly the Semites in their conquests. They've been breeding for aggression for a long time, and it's the female kind of aggression. So how we're going to test that and get enough data to say it's not reading into it is very hard, but it certainly looks like it in the data that's come out so far.
Yeah. Well, and then
So anyway, I'm sorry. So when we say Africa, and it's actually worse in the Islamic countries. Africans, if Africans have Christianity and soft eugenics for 6 generations, honestly, they're going to be fine. That's not the same in the Arab world because they're so hooked on this supernatural nonsense.
Well, the thing is that what do you I believe the oil exploration originally was Standard and Shell, the Dutch. So English, Americans, and Dutch explored that oil, and now it wasn't nationalized, but was tantamount to nationalization.
Well, that ends up being a moral argument, so I just avoid it altogether.
Okay.
Look, they hold their territory. You want to go do an Amerindian thing to them. There was a time when we could do that. At present, if we do it, there's just gonna be horrible consequences to that.
But all of that wealth in the hands of that culture, it strikes me as the whiskey and car keys to your teenage 16-year-old.
It's working. I have a followers in Egypt for some reason. I'm not really sure why. I think they are having the same nationalist experience in Egypt that the Hindus are, which is we were great and we lost our identity. We need to get back to it because this stuff is bad for us. This stuff has been bad for us. And so I have a lot of, an Egyptian engineer is a pretty talented fucking guy. They're game on. And so I don't, anyway, those guys are game on. So, it's really, if you look at their progress since 1970, it's not Chinese levels, but it's getting there. They have the same problem, though. They have a huge underclass. It's not only statistically challenged, it's also functionally illiterate, superstitious, and hostile to knowledge.
Yeah.
So this is the real issue, and I don't want them. We're compatible.
Okay? So now let's talk about the American underclass, or maybe American and Western Europe underclass. What do we have there, and what are the
white underclass has always been a subject. It only went away during the civil rights era. So we've only changed from. We always had problem whites. We always had. It used to be the Catholics. My father was either disinherited or threatened with disinheritance because my mother was Catholic. And so this was only in the 50s. And so Catholics. The reason we have the had prohibition in the States was largely because the Catholics drank too much. The Protestants wanted to suppress them, and the Catholics were the underclass. They came in from Italy, from Ireland, from all over, and they wanted to oppress us. So we paid the cost of integrating those underclass. Well, we still have, we had done a fairly good, once we got education down into the South, we had sort of done a pretty good job eliminating most of our underprivileged underclass. And now we have white trash like everybody else does, but it's just as a proportion of our population because of our distribution. It's just whereas if you're African American, you're kind of screwed because if you're an African American middle class family and you want to be respected, the problem is everybody who meets you is weighing you by the median of your distribution, which is pretty fucking horrible. You can understand why they get frustrated. So what does it matter with other class? Well, the problem with America is that we've imported these third worlders. We've reversed statistically our position. So where we were probably peer to the Jews in 1860, we've lost a standard deviation by now. The problem is once you get below 100, which is where we are now, it gets pretty scary. And once you go to 105, where the Chinese are, that's where you still have advantage. You get down to 100, you're starting to lose it. But there's a cliff under 97. And we're already at 99, I think. I think we're moving to 99. So over the next over the next few years, we could fall off the cliff at 97. At 95, you have to give up. So when people say ethno-nationalism doesn't matter, I'm like, well, ethno-nationalism matters not because of some highfalutin moral reason. It's because you've got to have different commons produced for groups of those different distributions. And because the price that each group pays for domesticating the people who are lower distribution is just too high for them. And so, you want to make people happy, they got to be able to produce commons that are suitable for them. asking people with 80 IQ African American or 90 IQ Hispanic, or you asking them with those kind of distributions when they have norms that are suitable to them, and ask them to conform to white East Asian or Ashkenazi standards of developmental behavior. I mean, it's just cruel.
Uh-huh.
It's cruel. It's cruel. So, I mean, why do we have to do that? Why can't we have things that are unequal because we mature at different rates? I mean, we have different levels of neoteny. I mean, I can't mention names, but I mean, it's not uncommon for Africans to develop body odor when they're in first grade.
Uh-huh.
It's not. In other words, they're starting to mature already. Well, they had to when they lived. They had to where they evolved.
They mature quicker, yeah.
Yeah, and so they mature quicker and deeper. And so, you're taking a guy with the highest possible human level of testosterone with an 85 IQ, and and you're asking him to behave like a white female.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's cruel. What he needs is what we used to call a military school, right?
Yeah.
Where things are ordered, where he can physically express things, where nothing is sit. Everything you're taught is done with motion. Mm-hmm. Even my kid, my family's, pretty old and about as white as you can be. And, my kid was a little on the big side, and he has my family's sense of clarity. Uh-huh. And we were afraid that he was going to get thrown out of school because, I mean, he's not going to start something, but if you give him stuff, he'll floor you.
Uh-huh.
And so we had to work so hard to get him out of that. Well, I mean, he just, you put him in, he's basically lives in Microsoft, and he's got a bunch of Asian and East Asian schoolmates, right? Well, they're essentially 12 by the time they're 4.
Uh-huh.
They don't do, they're calm. You can take an Asian baby. This is a great study. These straight roll them over in a crib. They don't cry. Yeah. They're perfectly happy. So, we're all matured different rates and different abilities, and this nonsense. We have to treat everybody
the same
instead of girls develop faster and especially more verbally, but they also peak earlier. And guys, some of us, we don't get all fully developed until we're 35 or 40.
Yeah, I considered for my own self, I was a Navy officer, and the last tour I did was as an exchange officer to the French Navy. And so I was 29 when I got sent to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, to learn French in 6 months, never having studied a foreign language, and then having to go and be a navigator on a French Navy ship. Yep. And I consider that at 29. And so when I got over that hump of learning the language and got functional in it enough to do a job as a Navy officer, I had this blossoming where I just started. That's where I got interested in libertarianism and all. I never gave a shit about any of that stuff before, And all of a sudden, and boom, and I'm writing like crazy, and And I
could make another argument that if I had observed you when you were 12, if I had listened to you talk when you were 12, I probably could have said, pull this guy out and do this, and he'll be fine. The problem is by putting us all into this batch, all going at the same rate, it's been horrible and worse. I mean, I can't imagine being in school today with you've got a retard in the classroom, disruptive retard in the classroom with you. I mean, I'd be so angry I wouldn't be able to go to school.
Yeah.
So whereas I was school, we had six levels in each class, and so I was always in 5 or 6.
Uh-huh.
Right? I needed a little. Autistic people need a little more time to mature. I should have probably gone into school a year later.
Uh-huh.
Right, as a kid. But you just have these things, and why are we forced to do things the same? Especially when it's
Yeah.
sitting in a classroom and listening to people bullshit is great for girls, but for guys, it's brain damaging.
My wife is a retired elementary school teacher, 5th and 6th grade, 35 years, and a little bit of junior high counseling. She retired, but now she is doing one-on-one tutoring with a high-functioning autistic boy, 3 hours every Monday and Friday. And it's amazing. The kid's parents literally call her in tears for the progress that he's making in verbal skills and writing and calming himself down. And, if he gets excited or something's funny, it's amazing what can happen with some one-on-one, instruction like that.
There's a way that the Japanese do it, and it will work, right? It's just not very enjoyable. We need to go look back at the Greeks a little bit, because they were a little more run them till they're tired, educate them this. Run them till they're tired. From this age, run them till they're tired, educate them this. It's this whole body calculation, but they thought of it as aesthetics music. And we are trying to keep the education cost. We're throwing a lot of money at education cost that is not producing returns, when we should be throwing money at restoring the gymnasium. And we should again. I mean, I can't tell you. I went to a St. Francis Xavier high school, which is a all boys Catholic monasterial school in Connecticut, and there is no comparison to boys' school. I mean, it's so much better.
Yeah,
it's so much better without the girl shit going on. And the girls, we took the same buses to school, but we got left off at different schools that are about a mile apart. And so you still, you can still have all these friendships, you still do the dances and all the other stuff together in the sporting events. But when you're in the classroom, you can get masculine treatment there. And the brothers are not nice, by the way. Nuns were not nice when I was in church school, and brothers were not nice when I was in high school. But it just was a better, more structured environment in this whole unstructured environment thing. It might be fine for some, but it's not good for boys.
So one last thing, and then we'll be at about an hour for this, about good. So let's, I've heard you on a number of occasions talk about whatever you subsidize, you get more of, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously. So what are we subsidizing in America right now that is of a dysgenic nature and getting more of?
We tax the middle class. Mm-hmm. And we have to, because that's most people. We tax the middle class to redistribute profits to the financial, media, and political sectors, and we redistribute reproduction downward to the underclasses, and we redistribute opportunity to immigrants. And so what's happening is we are taking the great work we did from depending on whose history you believe, from as early as late as 700 to as early as 1500 BC. We're taking that middle class genetics we did and hollowing it out. And so what you see California being rich and poor, right? I mean, there's almost no middle class. And you see this happening in New York. And so the middle class leaves. And that's because the middle class, in order to raise children in the middle class fashion, we need commons. We need a fairly rich environment that's low cost. And so what they're doing is they're taxing the productive people and destroying them through reproductively, and they're doing this and claiming it's good. Well, I mean, it's only good. It's only good for the next 3 weeks. It's not good
Right.
long term, especially when it's the entire difficulty for any civilization is producing that middle class. Well, we
Right.
only produced it in any scale. And we industrialized the process of domestication. And that's what Western civilization is. It's slave, serf, freeman, citizen, nobleman, aristocracy, right? We created, you can't even get fed unless you can produce a family. You can't own farmland unless you produce a family. You can't vote unless you fight. We produced this thing, which the purpose of which was not to oppress the underclass, which to prevent them from harming civilization through their reproduction and consumption. And so we just reversed it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to say that because it's hostile to the current method, and it's the means by which the state justifies its modern existence. But I mean, you can't be a scientist and look at it. And everybody who argues against this, they're not big scientists. They're just saying, I can't get away with saying this in a commercial venue.
You've said that one of your interesting ideas is that I recall reading long ago, and I thought, interesting. Where in whatever fashion you do it, paying underclasses to not reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like in our society now we do the exact opposite.
We do the opposite, and that's why that's why we're going to hit that 97 IQ problem, and that's why I said we're going to have a civil war, one or the other, because it's going to become intolerable.
Yeah, well,
you can't fix it. I mean, you're going to end up with Brazil.
Yeah. Right.
The Levant, or India. But if you want to have that Star Trek universe, you've got to have 1,000 nations. 1,000 nations bloom. The only way to make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, this is Richard Nicolai, freetheanimal.com, and I'll get this on to. I got to head off to visit the family. What are you doing tomorrow, Curt?
Tomorrow I'm going to a family with, I don't know. They put on a big spread. It's going to be insane. My autism will go postal after about an hour.
You better start fasting now so that you can eat big. Yeah. So I'm heading up to my brother's here in a few hours, and so same kind of deal. We're going to smoke a turkey tomorrow. So. All right, Richard Nicolai, freetheanimal.com. I will have this up on YouTube and blog post. I will put all the links for Curt, sorry, Propertarian Institute. What's the URL for that, Curt?
Propertarianism.com.
Propertarianism.com. He's also Curt Doolittle on Facebook, and he's about the most prolific Facebook poster I've ever seen in my life, and I do quite a few myself. But
you got to feed the hungry a constant stream.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Good talking to you. Bye bye.